So anyway, getting back to where Planet X might be, it's time for God has determined that it's time for the Earth to undergo destruction, but those who turn to God out of fear will be saved. He prophesies this in the Bible. Those who call upon the name of the Lord during this time of great destruction, pillars of fire, and great earthly destruction, those who call upon God, even if it's at the last minute out of fear, will be saved. So where it could be now, it's making its big U-turn. That's obvious because basic physics tells us that an object of coming in, being pulled in gravitationally by the sun, is not going to hit the sun, but it's going to loop around. It's going to overshoot the sun and make a looping U-turn around the sun. Well, it's Gilbert Erickson figures that it's probably around Saturn right now, based upon Dr. Harrington's calculations. So it's near the outer planets, and that's why we've seen a let up, an ease up in the number of earthquakes. Because remember, a few years ago we had more earthquakes. That was probably when Planet X was passing below that revolving circular table that we call the ecliptic plane, right below the sun and right below the inner planets, Earth, Mercury, Venus. And that's why we saw more earthquakes at that time. But now that it has overshot and gone toward the outer portion of the underside of that revolving table, now it should be we should be seeing signs of abnormalities on the outer planets, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and Jupiter. Gilbert Erickson feels that it's still below the ecliptic slightly, but I don't know how long it's going to take to make that U-turn, because it could be very slow. It could be a number more years than we thought. I know I've been surprised when you ask me about when. Everybody wants to know when. That's the big question.
Yeah.
I've been surprised because it's taken so long. I had expected it to be in sooner, but I'm glad I was wrong, because we've had that much more than many more years of grace in which to survive without suffering. But it's all a warning.
Yeah,
God is trying to be graceful with us and gracious and patient.
And what's interesting is what you mentioned about Jupiter and Saturn and the changes that were there. I remember when Jupiter lost its storm, that big storm spot that it has, that eye.
Right.
And,
That's right.
yeah, when the stripes changed. And I remember when Saturn lost its rings. Do you remember that?
Yeah, right. So there you go. I mean, you can look at that and get a general rough estimate of where this thing is right now. I remember back in 2009 when there were comet crashes into the southern hemisphere of Jupiter, and this was unheard of. Up till then, the only comet crash that they had ever recorded was Comet Shoemaker-Levy in 93 or 94 that crashed into the southern hemisphere of Jupiter, but that was the only one. And then all of a sudden in 2009 we had about two crashes that were recorded by amateur astronomers, and NASA never would have released the photos had it not been photographed by Anthony Wesley, the Australian amateur astronomer, and a couple other guys. Chris Go from the Philippines is another amateur astronomer. We've got to follow these amateur astronomers. That's so important, and I haven't been doing that. But I would advise you and your audience to get on the internet and look up. I would get onto Google and type in the word Saturn, just one word, but do a time search where you limit the hits that you're looking for to those that have occurred, say, during the last month. Articles with the word Saturn in them that have been issued somewhere in the last month, and the same thing with the word Jupiter or Uranus. This is how we'll find out what anomalies may have been reported in recent weeks.
And you know what? It's not a bad idea also when you type in something like that. Also, go to images rather than just web search, because sometimes when you go to images, you see something interesting in an image, you could click on it. It'll take you to the website that's putting that out. And if it's a NASA website, who knows? You might get lucky and find something.
Yeah, right. Although NASA is pretty careful to keep important stuff off of their websites because, again, they don't want anybody to know what's going on. And but you know what? Let me finish up this article here. Now, so again, we don't know where it is, but you can look at what's happening to the Earth. I mean, you see cold that has never occurred before in our recorded history. I mean, the Weather Channel is saying these records go back to the 1800s.
Yeah.
Never before have we seen such cold. I mean, coming down into Florida. Florida is now in freezing, below freezing, even down into Orlando. So these anomalies are very worrisome. I'm just glad that we haven't seen the earthquakes, but they're bound to happen, eventually. Right now it's weather. Now let me get into the weather real quick. The Weather Channel has done a series called Forecasting the End, which was done a couple of years ago. And I recorded the introductory episode titled Rogue Planets,
Yeah,
and
I
I put
seen
that
that.
on my Vimeo website, Vimeo account. You can see that Rogue Planets if you just go to my account on Vimeo, John DiNardo. And they show us a wonderful graphic of the solar system, and they say if a rogue planet ever came in, here's what would happen. And they show this planet coming in to the outer solar system, and its gravitational pull begins to pull on Jupiter or Saturn and pulls them out of their orbit somewhat. Now, what effect would that have on planet Earth? Well, they can tell you in this program, Rogue Planets on Forecasting the End series. They tell you that these outer planets, being so large, actually exert a gravitational pull on Earth and keep Earth in its circular orbit around the sun. You need pretty much a circular orbit in order to have decent, normal weather, livable weather conditions. Because if the orbit is elliptical, what's going to happen is in one part of the year, now one orbit is 1 year. In the extended outermost portion of that elliptical orbit, Earth would be too far away from the sun, and we would have disastrously cold winters. And then when the Earth came back in that elliptical orbit, in the other half of the year, and when it came back closer to the sun, we would have disastrously hot, scorching summers. Isn't that something like what we're beginning to experience in the last few years?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And you look at these storms, you look at the snow. I mean, look at what happened to Western New York. I think when was it back in December, and now what's hitting New England, Massachusetts. What's hit them recently. And I mean, the snow is just. I've seen some pictures that are pretty amazing. Uh,
Oh yeah, I mean it's just
and
it,
here's the thing now, John. When you get a lot of snow like that, I mean, even if it was a lot of rain, you get all that moisture. It's got to absorb into the ground, right? So they say that some scientists believe that with enough liquid going in, absorbing into the ground, that can also contribute to plates moving around, and certainly if an earthquake is close to happening, that'll set it off maybe.
Oh yeah, I mean there's so many repercussions that can come from these epic cold cold spells that we're having here, and I just visualize. I see that connection there. I see the Earth possibly its orbit being stretched out and being the cause of some of this cold weather.
Hey,
Uh,
here's one for
Now
you,
we've
quick.
been having epic hot summers too, so go ahead.
Well, John, I was just going to give you a comparison. You mentioned in Florida where it's going to be below freezing, and in Fairbanks, Alaska, it's 40 degrees.
Oh, okay. There's another side. I'm glad you brought that up. I put this thing out. It took a long time to write my scientific theory. I don't believe anybody in the world. I've looked for it. I don't believe anybody in the world has envisioned this theory that I have taken a long time to write up very carefully, very detailed way. It's an extensive report, and I've posted it on to my email list, and I've got to start tweeting it out on Twitter, tweeting the link to it because it is so important. And here's what the theory is: inside the Earth's core, and it makes sense to me. It's more than a theory; it's something that's based upon observations of what's happening. Earth's core, we know, is at the very center. It's like a pit, a solid pit within a fruit, like within an avocado, for example. The center core of the Earth is solid metal because the pressures are so great deep down in the Earth that metal precipitates out, and that's why you have metal in the center of the Earth, primarily metals and not so much of Earth matter, dirt and all that, stone and rock, but mostly metal. And however, at the center of the Earth is a solid metal nugget or pit, uh, and then surrounding that solid metal inner core is an outer core of liquid molten metal. So just imagine this, how would you visualize it? Visualize a potter's wheel, and on the potter's wheel is a bowl filled with water, and in the center of the bowl of water is a cork, let's say a cork, Now the potter's wheel begins to spin just like the Earth begins to spin. Now, the potter's wheel represents only the molten core of the Earth, with the cork being the solid metal inner core, and the water swirling around representing the molten iron outer core. And this, we know, is how the Earth's magnetic field is generated by this swirling sea of molten, mostly iron, mostly metal. And I want to describe in my detailed report that this metal is actually electrons in motion, because, you know, I've studied electronics for many years in physics, which includes electronics and electricity and magnetism. And what I've learned, probably more intimately than a lot of these scientists who have not noticed it, but this metal is free electrons. That's what we were taught in electronics school. Just like copper wire has free electrons in the outer valence bands of the copper atoms, I should say. And the outer valence bands of the copper atoms are electrons that are relatively free. They're not closely bound to the nucleus of the copper atom. Consequently, they can be moved. They're like travelers, you know, like wayfarers away from home. They don't stay inside, but they're like kids playing outdoors. You know what I mean? More or less.
Yeah.
These outlying valence electrons. So they're called free electrons, and they can be moved easily. Just as children playing outdoors can start getting into a little stampede, you know, playing around with their friends, and then running in a long race outdoors along the street rather than staying inside the house dormant. That's what these free electrons are like. And when you take that copper metal with the free electrons, or iron in this case, primarily iron, which comprises the Earth's molten outer core, and you swirl it around. How does it swirl? Because Earth rotates each day, each 24 hours it makes one rotation, and now consequently the molten outer core swirls. You have swirling metal with all the free electrons within it, and that motion of free electrons constitutes electric current. Anytime you have electrons in motion, you have electric current. So this electric current now is swirling like a belt, like a revolving belt around the belly of Earth, within Earth's core. And from this revolving, swirling belt of electrons, what is generated is an electromagnetic field that radiates outward. Visualize a hula hoop, okay? Earth is a huge body, like the person swirling the hula hoop would be the entire planet Earth. The hula hoop might be the inner core, even though the analogy is not perfect. The hula hoop is like that molten outer core within the Earth swirling around. And around the hula hoop, if you were able to be cut open the hula hoop, right, and put rings around it, big rings around inside the hula hoop, thread rings inside the hula hoop. I don't know if you're going to visualize that. Now the hula hoop is swirling, but there are rings swirling with the hula hoop acting as the center of these rings. Those rings they represent the Earth's magnetic field, and that's why the Earth's magnetic field comes up like the skin of an apple, for example. The skin of an apple might describe the path of the ring of the Earth's magnetic field. It comes down through the center core, the southern core of the apple, and up around the skin of the apple, and then over into the top dimple of the apple stem, and back through the center core again. And that's how the Earth's magnetic field is shaped. It's caused by the rotation, by the swirling action of Earth's molten outer core. Now, what happens as long as the Earth is swirling nice and neatly, and that inner core is at the very center, you're going to have a nice swirling motion, smooth swirling motion. But what happens if that center the metal solid iron pit at the center gets pushed off center? Mm-hmm. Then what's going to happen instead of that metal core, inner core rotating at the very center, it is going to rotate and revolve at the same time, like a stir in a cup of coffee. If you were to put the stir right at the center of the cup of coffee and put it between the palms of your hand and keep it at the center, it would not stir very well. It would not cause a wavy motion. But once you take that stir and move it around the outer portions of the coffee cup, then you cause a disturbance, a wavy motion. And that's what happens now when this inner solid core gets pushed off center. It begins to cause a waviness. And I found that if you look at the model that I represented to you with the hula hoop and the rings around the hula hoop, you could see if that hula hoop becomes wavy, which is what's going to happen when the center solid inner pit, metal pit core begins to move off center, it's going to cause a waviness in the hula hoop such that no longer will the Earth's magnetic field be nice and symmetrical like the skin of an apple, but it'll start to get wavy. And that's why we have a jet stream. The jet stream is produced by the Earth's magnetic field. So bottom line is I want to give you to you, cut through some of the scientific information and show you and tell you that whatever waviness, wavy pattern occurs with the Earth's molten
core about the Earth and where we're headed. So hang on with us, folks. This is Late Night in the Midlands on the LNF, John. But I was just giving a little speech, I guess, to the listeners about this whole Planet X topic. But now let me ask you: is it possible that the Earth actually just goes through? Because people will often say that. Well, there's been proof that in the past that the Earth has had floods. There's been pole shifts and magnetic pole shifts. And is it natural?
These are natural but disastrous cycles. And when people say, "Oh, it's just a cycle you're going through," it's just like telling somebody it's the nonsensical statement that, well, don't worry about dying. Everybody's going to die. But wait a minute. What if something's coming to kill you right now? Don't you want to know about it so you can avoid it? So this is a serious thing. It's going to be devastating to the human race. Yes, it is cyclical, and the reason it's cyclical is because this object comes in every 36.5 centuries. I wanted to zoom out from my detailed study of explanation of the Earth's core and show you the big picture as to what is causing the Earth's center core to be moved, and that is excitations from the sun. The sun has been so powerful and putting out so many emissions over the last 15 years. Sometimes the sun has quieted down, yes, but if you average out the sun's activity, you'll see that it's solar blasting, it's solar winds and flares have excited Earth's magnetic field and fed back that electromagnetic energy into the center core of the Earth, and that, I believe, is what has shifted the Earth's core, solid metal inner core, off of its center and caused the irregular wavy flow of the Earth's molten metal outer core.
So basically, John, is it like say a tennis ball, and you get, well, you mentioned a ball bearing earlier, so you get a big metal ball bearing, put it inside the tennis ball, and then again, if you were to run a magnet close nearby, it would pull that whole tennis ball. Right?
Very good. Yeah, it's a good analogy. That's what's happening to the Earth's solid metal inner core, and we have consequently been seeing these roller coaster like undulations of the jet stream, which are the cause of this disastrous weather. So it's important that we analyze it and see, wow, what's going on here? I mean, people are suffering in New England, people are suffering all over the country from this cold weather, and when it gets worse, more and more people are going to die. So we have to know about this, and we have to know, is it, as you said, some skeptics will, hopefully, in their hope, will say, well, maybe it's just a cycle, and maybe it'll get better, maybe it'll go away. That is a deadly, suicidal notion. I'll tell you right now, things are only going to get worse. I am absolutely positive. I'm not trying to be a scaremonger. I'm trying to help people and let them know that all of my studies and the studies of other people like me indicate that this is going to get worse because this object is definitely coming in, and I can show you proof. Here's the Power Elite have built underground cities. I have recorded it. They've taken it off of YouTube because that's how revealing it is and worrisome it is to the public. They have taken Jesse Ventura's Apocalypse 2012 TV program off of, I can't find it on YouTube anymore. They said, well, it's a copyright infringement. Well, maybe I shouldn't be telling you because they might take mine down too. I put it up on Vimeo, and I hope they don't take it down. But you can go to my Vimeo channel and you can see the Apocalypse 2012. Well, Jesse Ventura went into the bowels of Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, and they videotaped all that's going on there. This is $1 trillion facility, and they're going underground when things get bad.
Yeah, I seen that, and I actually talked to Jesse Ventura about that. And, his whole thing was, yeah, they're preparing for something, but he wouldn't say whether he thought it was, anything, celestial, but nevertheless, he
But
felt
why
that.
wouldn't he say? Did he comment? Did he say I don't know or?
No, he
Well,
actually told me in the interview I did with him. He says that he didn't, he's seen a lot of circumstantial evidence, but he didn't see any proof that it was Planet X that they were preparing for. But that it could even been a nuclear war they were preparing for. He said, but
well,
that's
I think.
him.
Well, yeah, nuclear war is another reason why they would want to go underground for sure. But Jesse Ventura did that report, and you see him in that report where he says they're going underground because of what's happening. I mean, he detailed it. The sun is going to go through some terrible traumatic blasting, which is going to be hazardous to life on the surface of Earth. And they are going underground. I mean, it's all detailed in those episodes that I put on Vimeo. So for Jesse Ventura to say he doesn't see any evidence that it's an incoming body, well, I can understand that too, but realize that he's under threat. I mean, he's a courageous man, but if he says anything that he shouldn't be saying, he may not be alive. In fact, that's why he moved to Mexico.
Yeah, yeah.
He's got a lot of courage, and there are certain things that he cannot say, certain things that Alex Jones cannot say, because their lives are threatened. And if I ever got, or you or I ever got to be to a position where we're highly visible publicly, we may be threatened too.
I'll tell you what, I'm not as big as those guys, but I've already had threats. I mean, I get attacked. I've had my websites ripped down, all kinds of stuff. So I know, I can imagine it just gets better the more popular you get.
Yeah, I mean, they don't want us to be telling these things, and I'm surprised. I mean, I can only depend on God to protect me because God wants me. I know from the thoughts that I get from communing with God and knowing his character and reading the Bible. He says, warn people about what is coming. That's what he did in God's word. The book of Revelation is a warning to the world that something disastrous. Comets are meteors are going to strike Earth. I mean, it's all in the book of Revelation. There are going to be earthquakes that are so huge. Every island and every mountain will be shaken and moved. That's how bad it's going to get. So God is warning us that, look, what we have to do is prepare now. We cannot be skeptical and put our heads in the sand, because if an ostrich bends over and sticks his head in the sand, he's making his butt a very large target. And we don't want to be ostriches to do that, because it's suicidal. So people have to wake up. Those who are aware, like you and I, and those who are proactive and courageous are going to prepare, and those who don't want to listen will fall by the wayside.
Yeah. Well, and then I think about this too, and it's not a cop out or anything, but then if something like this happens, if this does come to be, what about all these nuclear power plants that we have around the planet? I mean, how can anybody prepare for what that will do?
You can't. You can only depend upon God. I mean, we have our basements. There is going to be, if nuclear war and nuclear meltdowns of power plants, we have to stay indoors and try to minimize the radiation that we're exposed to. You're right. There's so many power plants that would be recklessly built on fault lines in the New Madrid fault zone area of the lower Midwestern United States. There are many nuclear power plants built right on fault lines, and there's one in New York, just north of New York City here, not far from where I live. It's the Indian Point nuclear power plant is built right on top of a fault line. And when that earthquake occurs, which they will, all the fault lines will be disrupted and cracked open from the Earth changes that are the pressures that are occurring within Earth right now. Those nuclear power plants will melt down, and we're going to have radiation. I mean, just look at Fukushima, one nuclear plant, what it has done to planet Earth, and then multiply that by 100 nuclear power plants, which they will not shut down. The people won't go for it because they're too dependent upon the power. And what are they doing? They're shutting down the coal-fired power plants on this suspicious notion that the coal is polluting the atmosphere, and they're turning it over to all the nuclear interests, the nuclear power wealth interests.
Well, I'll tell you, we've got several vents on the ocean floor, volcanoes that constantly are releasing the CO2, and it releases more than you or I could ever make with our SUVs or any of that. So
that's right.
It's a real poor argument they put out for global warming. Yet people will still argue with me about it and say, "Oh, how could you say it's not real? Don't you see what's happening?" It's like, yeah, but there's another answer to it, because there's not people on Mars, and it wasn't long ago they had a 40-degree day there. So,
Yeah, right. I mean, Mars is undergoing the same kind of abnormal changes too, and the other planets, as you point out. So it's not something that we're doing on Earth that's causing this. It's something coming from the outside. But of course, the powers that be had to make up an excuse and blame it on what man does.
well, yeah,
And
because
that's
then
a good point.
they could tax us too now. Oh, we're going to get all these carbon taxes,
Oh
and we
yeah,
could
right,
build more
right.
facilities.
They use it to make money, to get wealthy. That's right, the carbon taxes. At the same time, what they do is, I've always likened this to Batman and Robin. Sure, man is contributing slightly, just like Robin would contribute slightly to some of the action in a fight involving Batman and Robin against the bad guys. But the man harp and all that stuff that man is doing, the harp experiments that are disturbing the earth, that's like Robin's power compared to Batman, which is Planet X. And that's what they don't want you to know. You see, the power elite, as long as they can fool us into believing that they are the ultimate power, the supreme power on earth, then we will fear them and obey them and be their obedient slaves. However, when people begin to realize that it's not Satan controls mankind on earth, and Satan wants to be the one who keeps man in fear. Just look at the fear they're imposing on us through Satan's New World Order. However, they don't want us to know that God is far more powerful. And the book of Revelation tells us that there is going to be a battle between, for man's soul, man's devotion, man's attention. That battle will be between Satan and his New World Order and the superior, fearful, awesome force of God, bringing in Planet X, disrupting the earth with earthquakes. I'm much more afraid of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions than I am of the government. And everybody is.
Yeah.
So that's what they don't want you to know, because as soon as we become more fearful of God and his power coming from the heavens and coming on us to disrupt this earth, then they will become obedient and call out to God rather than obedient to Satan. And that's what Satan hates. And that's why they're making you believe, tricking so many people, even well-meaning patriots who really don't study God's word, don't study the Bible and the prophecies of the end destruction of this earth.
Well,
they don't know that this is all a big scam to make it look like it's HARP and fracking. That's another big scam. Fracking is supposedly the cause of all these earthquakes. Well, you watch and see when these earthquakes occur and the entire world begins to crack open like a raw egg, and see how many people are going to be talking about fracking.
yeah, well, we know that fracking's not good, but I do know this, that there's areas where they don't frack, and they're undergoing lots of earthquakes too. Whether they're small ones or not, they're still having them. So I wouldn't contribute at all to fracking by no means, but I've said that in the past that, what if they use things like HARP and these different things? What if they, yeah, they do have a purpose for them, but what if they purposely blow them out of proportion to take you off of what's really going on? But then I've said that the other way around too. There was a time when I said, well, what if Planet X is to take us away from what they're doing here on Earth? But I don't think that man can do half as much as what nature can do. Although either one could wipe us out.
Well, no, you're right. I mean, it's the man is doing some damage, and again, it's a battle between Satan and God, and this is a supernatural situation that we're Earth is experiencing here, and people have to understand that. A lot of patriots try to fight the New World Order and get our Constitution back. And, there's no way you can stop the New World Order because with man's help only. You need supernatural power of God, because Satan, with his power, there are billions, literally billions, of fallen angels who are aiding Satan, indwelling people. I know it sounds weird, but these spirits are throughout the scriptures. We can see prophecies of Jesus, the Son of God, and even people who don't believe that he's the Son of God will certainly believe that he was honest in the four Gospels, where he talked about demons, fallen angels indwelling people in many, many instances throughout the four Gospels. So we know that this is true. We know that Jesus gave us true prophecy. And we know that if demons had possessed people then and made them do bad things, I experienced demons affecting my life throughout my life. I told you about some of the things I did. I know it was from demonic spirits. who knew that I was destined to be a child of God and were trying to pull me away and destroy me. And we see many people, and very often there's the same pattern of experience that people, children of God, have. They have a very turbulent life in their early years because they're being misled and directed by demonic spirits who want to pull them away from God. But ultimately, God wins the battle and brings them closer to Him. That's what happened to me, and that's what happened to many people in the past. So we know that these demonic spirits are influencing us, and this is a spiritual battle. Therefore, this is a spiritual battle. There's no way you can stop the New World Order unless you turn to God, and He's going to protect us. The book of Revelation, for example, tells us that what's going to happen is these angels are now coming through portals, all right, dimensional portals, indwelling men, and you see evil multiplying and intensifying in mankind today in so many cases. And what's happening, though, is that other people are turning to God, and the goodness of human beings is also intensifying. And that's why the line is being drawn. There's a polarization occurring so that all the people who are sitting on the fence in between, not choosing good or evil, just spectators and on the world stage and in the audience of the world, around the world stage, are now being forced to make a decision to choose either God or choose the devil. And that's what they're doing with television. So this whole thing is all part of the same multifaceted situation where you have Planet X coming in, great destruction facing the earth, and now it's intensifying the destruction with the weather. And then you see great evil enveloping mankind and the governments of the world, such that it's becoming a unification of evil, a one world government, conglomeration. All the nations are being amalgamated into this one evil force under the powers of Satan, the New World Order. At the same time, destruction comes, and man is being forced to make a choice. Soon we'll be forced to worship Satan, take that mark in your hand, which will be, the Bible tells us, the book of Revelation is going, that mark with which you cannot buy or sell. You see, you need that mark, you need to buy stuff. So as a result, you're going to take that mark, and that's how Satan is going to get people to worship him, through that mark of allegiance in their body. And they're being prepared now with these marks, the tattoos all over their bodies, pins in their bodies, rings all over their body. It's disgusting. And you can see the preparation for the people taking the mark right now, the psychological acceptance of it.
Yeah, and you know, there's actually people. I seen a video recently where a woman was really happy because she was the first one to get the chip, and she got a chip. I think it was put in her hand. Now, which one I'm not sure of, but she did get it put in her hand, and I forget what it was for. It was for some, but you know, eventually that's what it's coming to. I seen today.
Soldiers, all the military.
Yeah, I seen today where they says some kind of computer technology now where wouldn't it be nice, you don't have to put your password in anymore, your face becomes your password, so the computer will do facial recognition to let you. I mean, have people got that lazy now where they can't even type in their passwords? They got to get facial recognition to get into their computers. And so yeah, you're
next door, but still within the gravitational influence of the sun. Now I'm the only one who has noted that. This is a very telling comment. It's 5 billion. It was 5 billion miles out, but they stated in the scientific article that it was still within the gravitational influence of the sun. That means it's like a ball bearing that has just barely got within the outer fringes of the gravitation of the magnetic force field of a powerful magnet, say some distance away. And once it gets even within the weak outer fringes of that force field, it will get inexorably sucked in, and it will begin to accelerate. Well, that's exactly what's happening here, since it's been captured. So they noted in this article that this dwarf star was indeed captured in the outer bounds of our solar system by our sun's gravitational force field. And that's basically the article there. But I want to tell you something about the Pope now. In Pope John Paul II, I've got an article in front of me, and this, you can document this. You can find the proof of this. In Fulda, F-U-L-D, Germany, in 1980, Pope John Paul II. I'm reading in this article, the October 1981 issue of the German magazine, and I'm going to try to pronounce it, Stimme des Glaubens, S-T-I-M-M-E, for those who want to research it. D-E-S is the next word, G-L-A-U-B-E-N-S, Stimme des Glaubens, reported in this German magazine the discussion between Pope John Paul II that he had with a group of German Catholics in November of 1980. The following is a verbatim report of this discussion between Pope John Paul II and leading Catholics in Germany. The Holy Father was asked, what about the third secret of Fatima? Should it not have been published by 1960? Now, for those who don't know, there was a great messianic fervor in the late 1950s because people were waiting for the revelation that was promised by the sisters who had seen this vision in 1917 at Fatima, Portugal. And the third secret had been kept secret, kept in a letter from one of the girls. The only survivor was Sister Lucia, who became a nun. And her letter was from the angel that spoke to her was supposed to be revealed in 1960. Well, it never was revealed. Pope Pius XII died in the late 1950s before that 1960 revelation time occurred. And I have information that he was murdered. Pope Pius XII was probably murdered along with Cardinal Ottaviani, Ottaviani. The reason is that they were both privy to the letter. They had opened the letter in the late 1950s in the presence of Father Richard Hughes, the secretary, the American priest secretary of Pope Pius XII. And they read the letter, and I was told by a source that I cannot reveal that Pope, when he read this letter of the instruction, Pope Pius XII wept bitterly for that was the words. Pope Pius XII wept bitterly for 2 weeks following the reading of that letter, the private reading between him and Cardinal Ottaviani and Father Hughes. Father Hughes revealed this. I hope he's okay and not in danger. But anyway, so it was a horrible revelation, and it was never revealed. Pope Pius XII died, and in 1960, they did not keep their promise. They did not open the letter, and that's why the question was asked in 1980 to Pope John Paul II. Why did not they reveal publish this 1960 Fatima secret, the third secret? And Pope John Paul II replied, quote, given the seriousness of the contents, my predecessors in the Patrine office diplomatically preferred to postpone publication so as not to encourage the world power of communism to make certain moves. Well, that was a cover story where they blamed communism and all that stuff. But here he goes on and spills the beans, tells the real truth. Quote, Pope John Paul II said, on the other hand, it should be sufficient for all Christians to know this, if there is a message in which it is written that the oceans will flood whole areas of the earth, and that from one moment to the next, millions of people will perish. Truly, the publication of such a message is no longer something to be so much desired. End quote. And there was the essence of the third secret of Fatima.
See, I wish somebody would just go in and snatch it and well, put it out to the public.
He told us right there what it is. And you know what? Sister Lucia was murdered. There is so much evidence. Sister Lucia, one of the girls who had heard from the angel, this was an angel of God, a supernatural event where God gave this angel to the little, had this messenger angel tell the little girls what was going to happen. And they died. Some of them died from the Great Spanish Flu, but Sister Lucia remained, and you could see photos of bogus imposters of Sister Lucia. They're all on the internet, where you can compare the faces, and they're definitely not the same face. I mean, anyone, but especially those who are done forensic or studies of facial structure have shown us what we can clearly, with any layman can see with their eyes, that this is not the same woman. Sister Lucia was murdered probably around 1948. They moved her from one convent to another. Then there was a phony one, and I was told that there was a second phony, well, the first phony Sister Lucia refused to go along with it, and they probably killed her. And now they got this other Sister Lucia who played the role until she died a few years ago. She was visited by the actor.
I'm not sure, but
the actor who played Jesus in the Passion of the Christ.
Now, is she the one they have encased in a glass like setting, and I mean people were viewing her or whatever? She's in
I don't know. She was in. Oh, I mean, you mean when she was
Well, after her death, they had the
I
body inside a glass casing.
I did not follow the story after her death. That
Oh,
may have
okay.
probably was. Probably, but it was an imposter really. It was someone playing the role of Sister Lucia because she probably wanted to talk, especially, you know, at a time when they figured, look, this woman's too dangerous. We have to get rid of her. Uh, it's all because the power elite do not want to disturb the world. If they were to, just as the Pope said here, I mean, he said it as clearly as you could possibly. And he made it so obvious. He said, if there's such a message that the oceans will flood whole areas of the earth and that from one moment to the next, millions of people will perish, truly the publication of such a message is no longer something to be so much desired. In other words, we ain't going to tell you if just the world is going to end. We'd be crazy to tell you that.
Well, right, and he says if there was such a message, so it's like he told us, but he didn't tell
Well,
us. And
oh well, no, he's saying, hey, if there's a message. In other words, there is a message. That's basically what he's implying. He's just about coming out and saying it. I mean, 99% revealing it to you. That's the message. That whole oceans will flood whole areas of the earth, and from one moment to the next, millions of people will perish. That's the vision that was given to the Sister Lucia in 1917 in Fatima, Portugal. That oceans would flood the earth and people would be dying. And of course, we know the book of Revelation tells us that after the floods, there's going to be burning. The earth will be destroyed by fire. That's what the book of Peter tells us too. So how would it be destroyed by fire? Well, as this planet gets closer and closer, it's inevitable. There's no way you can stop it. Just like you cannot stop a meteor being sucked into Earth's gravitational field and plunging to the Earth. You can't stop it. This brown dwarf star cannot be stopped in its plunge toward the sun, in its gravitational plunge toward the sun. And as it passes by Earth into the inner solar system, its gravitational and its electromagnetic influences will be so great that it's going to tilt Earth, tilt it so that you tip it like you would tip over a teacup, and Earth is going to rotate vertically. In fact, if you look at the book of Isaiah, 600 BC, where it was written around 6 centuries before the birth of Christ, in that book of Isaiah, chapter 24, it says the earth will wobble to and fro like a drunkard, which is what it's beginning to do right now. Look at that inner core. It's off center. That solid metal inner core is being forced off center by the overall average long-term solar blasting that's been occurring, magnetically influencing the Earth's, feeding back through the Earth's magnetic field, causing the Earth to wobble. But as this planet gets closer to this dwarf star, its gravitational field is also going to cause an additional wobbling of the Earth. So the book of Isaiah, this is God spoke to Isaiah, and Isaiah said, the word of the Lord came to me. This was 600 years before Christ. In chapter 24, it says, the earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard. Just imagine a drunk walking down the street and staggering like he's going to fall over. And after it reels to and fro, it will topple. Well, what happens to a spinning top, a child's top? Have you ever seen one?
yeah,
Most of us have.
they slow.
Nowadays, I don't know, they don't have too many for kids, but the spinning top is like a gyroscope, and it maintains its erectness because of its spin. But as the spin begins to slow down, it loses its erectness, and it begins to wobble. And eventually, the wobbling begins to increase, intensify, exaggerate, until the top topples. That's what's going to happen to planet Earth. Why? Well, it's like a hand. The Earth is being, it's losing its revolutionary momentum due to another object acting upon it externally, disrupting it. Its rotation, its revolution around the sun. And that object is a brown dwarf star, which NASA itself calls Planet X. And that object acts like a giant hand at a distance, because gravity acts is action at a distance. A giant hand slowing down the top, pulling on it, causing it to wobble, slow down in its rotation, daily rotation, and to wobble and fall over. And it also says, it will nod like a hammock. But I don't want to go into too much detail because we have limited time. But they did discover it. Okay, I read you the New York Times, January 1983. 11 short months later, after the infrared astronomical satellite spent most of 1983 searching out Planet X. It found Planet X, and they reported it triumphantly on the front page of the Washington Post, front page, Washington Post, December 30th, 1983. The New York Times article was January 30th, 1983. So you have here a full 11 months later. Here's the article, front page. I've got it right in front of me. I photocopied it from the library, Washington Post. Possibly as large as Jupiter, a mystery heavenly body written by Thomas O'Toole, Washington Post staff writer. This is the actual photocopy of the newspaper article. Quote, a heavenly body possibly as large as the giant planet Jupiter and possibly so close to Earth that it would be part of this solar system has been found in the direction of the constellation Orion by an orbiting telescope aboard the U.S. infrared astronomical satellite. And so here they discovered it. And they go on to sort of like, they figure, well, we better not give them the whole story. We better make it a little bit. We don't want it limits. It's a blackout. Don't talk about it anymore. And now it's been secret ever since then.
I see. Well, John, we're just about out of time. I want to give you the next 3 minutes to get out anything that you'd like, plug any websites or anything. Go ahead, and I want to thank you for taking time out to be with us. I've never doubted that the possibility of something being out there, and I know they've looked for it, and I know they've said they found it. So I'm sure that what you're telling us is pretty accurate. Now, it's just. For me, I'm one of those guys who I have to see it before I'll run to the hills anyways. I don't have to see it to know that something's there. That I don't. But I guess for me, it's wherever the good Lord takes me, I'm supposed to be. If it's meant for me to run to the hills and survive this thing or get underground, then that's what will happen. But I have no plans of running. I'm going to sit here and keep telling people what's going on until I'm stopped, until, it all ends. But I thank you so much. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I advise everybody just keep watching the weather. It's very important that you keep your eyes on what's happening. Look at the reports of the earthquakes and the volcanic eruptions. Reports that Yellowstone, which is a super volcano, is showing signs that it's about to erupt. And try to get prepared in whatever way you can. For example, with Yellowstone, you have to get these masks. I ordered some of these. They're very relatively cheap. Welder's masks. They have very high filtration, very good filtration. It's a welder's mask. It's straps on, has adjustable straps, and they're pretty cheap, only a few bucks for each one. I bought about 20 of them. So start ordering these welder's masks. I forget the name and everything, but you can look it up on the internet. Start getting the other supplies that you need. Food, of course, is so important. Canned food, canned white meat chicken, and then dried legumes, dried split peas, dried lentils, barley, canned beans, all the food that's preservable and that you can use to survive on. Most important thing is water. You cannot go without water for more than a day or so. I've got so many empty bottles that I've been collecting. I never throw away empty bottles, plastic bottles. I don't care that they're plastic because I'm going to filter the water anyway. And besides, when you're dying of thirst, you're not too fussy about the quality of the water. So I've got like hundreds of gallons of water stored in my basement from empty bottles. Now you can go to the recycling place and get a lot of them in a short period of time. Maybe they'll give you some. So that's the idea, to get those water bottles, because you want to survive. Water is the most essential, and air, of course, with the masks. When the volcano erupts and when the other disasters occur, you're going to have skies that are filled with deadly fumes and smoke and ash, etc. So you're going to need good gas masks. And think of all the other things too that you're going to need for surviving the weather that you'll be monitoring yourself, the volcanic eruption. So anyway, getting back to where Planet X might be, It's time for God has determined that it's time for the earth to undergo destruction, but those who turn to God out of fear will be saved. He prophesies this in the Bible. Those who call upon the name of the Lord during this time of great destruction, pillars of fire, and great earthly destruction, those who call upon God, even if it's at the last minute out of fear, will be saved. So where could it be now? It's making its big U-turn. That's obvious because basic physics tells us that an object of coming in, being pulled in gravitationally by the sun, is not going to hit the sun, but it's going to loop around. It's going to overshoot the sun and make a looping U-turn around the sun. Well, it's Gilbert Erickson figures that it's probably around Saturn right now, based upon Dr. Harrington's calculations. So it's near the outer planets, and that's why we've seen a let up, an ease up in the number of earthquakes. Because remember, a few years ago we had more earthquakes. That was probably when Planet X was passing below that revolving circular table that we call the ecliptic plane, right below the sun and right below the inner planets, Earth, Mercury, Venus. And that's why we saw more earthquakes at that time. But now that it has overshot and gone toward the outer portion of the underside of that revolving table, now it should be affecting, we should be seeing signs of abnormalities on the outer planets, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and Jupiter. Gilbert Erickson feels that it's still below the ecliptic slightly, but I don't know how long it's going to take to make that U-turn, because it could be very slow. It could be a number more years than we thought. I know I've been surprised when you ask me about when. Everybody wants to know when. That's the big question.
Yeah.
I've been surprised because it's taken so long. I had expected it to be in sooner, but I'm glad I was wrong, because we've had that much more, many more years of grace in which to survive without suffering. But it's all warnings,
Yeah,
God is trying to be graceful with us and gracious and patient.
And what's interesting is what you mentioned about Jupiter and Saturn and the changes that were there. I remember when Jupiter lost its storm, that big storm spot that it has, that eye.
Right.
And,
That's right.
yeah, when the stripes changed. And I remember when Saturn lost its rings. Do you remember that?
Yeah, right. So there you go. I mean, you can look at that and get a general rough estimate of where this thing is right now. I remember back in 2009 when there were comet crashes into the southern hemisphere of Jupiter, and this was unheard of. Up till then, the only comet crash that they had ever recorded was Comet Shoemaker-Levy in 93 or 94 that crashed into the southern hemisphere of Jupiter, but that was the only one. And then all of a sudden in 2009 we had about two crashes that were recorded by amateur astronomers, and NASA never would have released the photos had it not been photographed by Anthony Wesley, the Australian amateur astronomer, and a couple other guys. Chris Go from the Philippines is another amateur astronomer. We've got to follow these amateur astronomers. That's so important, and I haven't been doing that. But I would advise you and your audience to get on the internet and look up. I would get onto Google and type in the word Saturn, just one word, but do a time search where you limit the hits that you're looking for to those that have occurred, say, during the last month. Articles with the word Saturn in them that have been issued somewhere in the last month, and the same thing with the word Jupiter or Uranus. This is how we'll find out what anomalies may have been reported in recent weeks.
And you know what? It's not a bad idea also when you type in something like that. Also, go to images rather than just web search, because sometimes when you go to images, you see something interesting in an image, you could click on it. It'll take you to the website that's putting that out. And if it's a NASA website, who knows? You might get lucky and find something.
Yeah, right. Although NASA is pretty careful to keep important stuff off of their websites because, again, they don't want anybody to know what's going on. And but you know what? Let me finish up this article here. Now, so again, we don't know where it is, but you can expect. Look at what's happening to the Earth. I mean, you see cold that has never occurred before in our recorded history. I mean, the Weather Channel is saying these records go back to the 1800s.
Yeah.
Never before have we seen such cold. I mean, coming down into Florida. Florida is now in freezing, or below freezing, even down into Orlando. So these anomalies are very worrisome. I'm just glad that we haven't seen the earthquakes, but they're bound to happen, eventually. Right now it's weather. Now, let me get onto the weather real quick. This is, the Weather Channel has done a series called Forecasting the End, which was done a couple of years ago. And I recorded the introductory episode titled Rogue Planets,
Yeah,
and
I
I put
seen
that
that.
on my Vimeo website, Vimeo account. You can see that Rogue Planets if you just go to my account on Vimeo, John DiNardo. And what is they show us a wonderful graphic of the solar system, and they say if a rogue planet ever came in, here's what would happen. And they show this planet coming in to the outer solar system, and its gravitational pull begins to pull on Jupiter or Saturn and pulls them out of their orbit somewhat. Now, what effect would that have on planet Earth? Well, they can tell you in this program, Rogue Planets on Forecasting the End series. They tell you that these outer planets, being so large, actually exert a gravitational pull on Earth and keep Earth in its circular orbit around the sun. You need a pretty much a circular orbit in order to have decent, normal weather, livable weather conditions. Because if the orbit is elliptical, what's going to happen is in one part of the year, now one orbit is 1 year. In the extended outermost portion of that elliptical orbit, Earth would be too far away from the sun, and we would have disastrously cold winters. And then when the Earth came back in that elliptical orbit, in the other half of the year, and when it came back closer to the sun, we would have disastrously hot, scorching summers. Isn't that something like what we're beginning to experience in the last few years?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And you look at these storms, you look at the snow. I mean, look at what happened to Western New York. I think when was it back in December, and now what's hitting New England, Massachusetts. What's hit them recently. And I mean, the snow is just. I've seen some pictures that are pretty amazing. Uh,
Oh yeah, I mean it's just
and
it,
here's the thing now, John. When